I'm Gabby. Welcome to the Happier Life Project, brought to you by free mental health and wellness app, My Possible Self, in partnership with the Priory Healthcare. In the Collins Dictionary, the definition of emotional baggage is the feelings you have about your past and the things that have happened to you, which often has a negative effect on your behaviour and attitude. Well, I would add it's the unresolved issues that hold us back and dim our light. So, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could identify and release some, if not all, of that pain and discomfort? Today's guest has helped thousands of clients do just that. Natalie Lue is a writer, speaker, podcaster, artist and founder of one of the longest running self-help blogs in the world, Baggage Reclaim. Natalie has spent years helping people pleasers, perfectionists, overthinkers, low self-esteemers and relationship strugglers overcome their emotional baggage and break free from their patterns and negative thought behaviours to reclaim the life they truly deserve. In this conversation, we're going to learn about how to uncover and unpick the cluttered crap from our past that no longer serves us. We're also going to find out how to identify if our needs are being met by our loved ones and why we need to recognise our values and self-worth in order to stop people-pleasing and constantly putting others first to the detriment of our own health. Sometimes we are aware of the past traumas and negative experiences, but other times we are lugging around a bunch of unnecessary weight that we can accumulate from as early as infancy. During our conversation, Natalie shares some of the symptoms that can manifest physically as well as mentally and emotionally to look out for. She also discusses why getting into relationships with emotionally unavailable people is to be avoided at all costs. She also talks about the importance of preference, not programming, and the joy of saying no. So, ready to find a healthier, happier you? Let's get started. Welcome to the Happier Life Project, Natalie, and I'll try and get all your accolades across. You're a writer, podcaster, speaker, course creator, 4 books under your belt and another one just released, so that's 5 books. And for almost 20 years, you've been helping individuals to manage their self-esteem and relationships in professional as well as personal spaces. You've been very, very busy. And you've helped a lot of people, first of all.
I have been busy. I look back at it, when you say almost 20 years, I go, Jesus, yeah, I have been on for almost 20 years, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I always feel like when I'm doing my research and I'm either pulling things from your content or from other, interviews and stuff, and there's just so much. And I have to look at my notes to read the next bit. You inspire, empower and guide your clients to overcome their past so they can raise their self-worth, figure out why so often are attracted to emotionally unavailable partners, and break depleting habits like people-pleasing, poor boundaries, being self-critical or unfulfilling relationships. So basically you help people get to the crux of their emotional baggage and help them work through it, I suppose, and to get rid of some of it, I would assume.
Yeah, unpack, declutter, tidy up, you're sort of right. Processing that so that you can reclaim yourself, because we can only, I know as humans, we like to think we can just accumulate and accumulate and accumulate, and that we can just go all the way through life having all of these experiences, all these emotional, mental, physical, spiritual responses to stuff, and that we can just accumulate it and we'll just continue on. We can only carry so much. So we do have to know what to let go of, or we have to adjust the way that we're carrying certain things. I liken it to if you have, because remember when, because I don't have one of these, but I grew up with my mom having like a linen closet in a hallway. And, when it's stuffed full of stuff and it's not tidied up, it just looks like you can't fit anything else in it. But then when you get rid of some stuff out of there and you fold up the other stuff and you have sort of a neat and organization, suddenly you have room. And it is a similar thing with emotional baggage in the sense that we're carrying, these old stories, judgments, criticisms, old feelings, emotional charge about past experiences that influence the way that we think, feel, and behave today, that are influencing the way that we choose. And because we don't know about this, we haven't been raised where, for if we're an adult now, we probably haven't been taught to about self-care and boundaries and feelings and needs. If I turned around and I was like, I'm feeling such and such, they'd be like, what are you talking about? Get outside and play and stop messing around. I'll give you something to cry about. Type of thing.
For the millennials and onwards, for sure, we weren't really encouraged to speak about our feelings, were we?
No, not at all. Like my children's generation, like they are totally different to us. That doesn't mean that they don't have their struggles, because by goodness, teens now, there's so much anxiety. There's so much stress. There's so many different things that well, not different, but so many things that they are also dealing with. But in amongst that, they're dealing with this stuff, aware that there is such a thing as boundaries and self-care. They know about the term anxiety. Like that's not something that came into my vocabulary until well into adulthood. That they understand about the body and stress. We were not taught about this stuff. Like nobody taught us about values. First time I heard people talking about that stuff in a more intentional, this is about who you are as a person and having a sense of what your morals are or what you want to do in life, as opposed to these are values in terms of church or following rules at school. I didn't know about that stuff until well into adulthood.
Going through your material, for sure, there was a lot of aha moments, but just kind of going with this, I guess, the analogy of like stuff and cluttering. I thought it was really interesting. I learned recently that in Feng Shui, in terms of sorting out your physical belongings in a house and decluttering your house is a direct reflection of you on the inside. And I thought that was so interesting and kind of applied here as well. Where, I mean, some people do have a messy house and it's okay to have a messy house and have stuff. But then there's also when it looks like a TV show, when they go in and, there's stuff everywhere and it's the world's worst hoarders, those kind of TV shows. But actually on the inside, I think for a lot of us, we are the world's worst hoarders, but we just don't know it.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh, like you totally nailed it, because we carry on as if we have like an attic and a basement and like a living room and a few bedrooms and a kid, like in our bodies, like all these. So it's like, oh, these things that I don't want to think about anymore or that I feel angry about or whatever, I'll just shove those like in the garage, the basement. I'll shove it on an external hard drive. There is no external hard drive. There is no basement. There's no attic. It's just one. Anything that I guess that we might deem as bad feelings, the difficult stories that we're carrying, the judgments, it's all in the same place as the good stuff. And of course, if you're carrying a lot, it's going to encroach on any good feelings, good experiences as well, because there's only so much we can carry. 100% is 100%. It's not going to suddenly expand into something else. We can't buy an external hard drive and plug it into ourselves and start to disperse the extra stuff that we don't want to deal with. And so we have to start looking at ourselves.
And so is that how everything started for you? It was sort of you'd acquired too much stuff and then you started to look at it because it was not good for you, basically, physically, mentally, emotionally. And that's how, the blog started and you went from there. Because you honestly, Natalie, your way with words is it's so profound and your voice comes through and it's so relatable as well. And I'm like, was she like Buddha, where one day she just meditated for like 12 hours and then this higher power just like gave her all this knowledge about emotional baggage and people pleasing and all of this stuff? I'd love to know how it all began for you.
So for me, I had grown up with this attitude that you don't talk about stuff. I come from a Jamaican family on both sides. One side is Jamaican Chinese, the other has Jamaican, Jewish, Spanish background on both sides, talking about stuff, not the done thing. And then when you mix in being in English culture, which, stiff upper lip,
Yeah.
polite,
Yeah.
polite front, and then in Irish culture as well, where, because I grew up in Ireland, it was just the sense of the ways that I'm feeling about myself or about what I'm seeing going on is wrong. And when I tell the truth as I see it, if I talk, I get into trouble for that. And what I also found myself doing was having this attitude of, do you know what? If something really bothers me or upsets me, I will just stuff it away and I just won't as such look at it or think about it until it's further down the line because it won't bother me. So a prime example of where I did that was with romantic relationships, where I would just bounce from relationship to relationship. And the idea was that if I just stuffed it away, by the time I thought about it again or allowed myself to think about it again, I'd probably already be involved in something else. Or I'd feel like, well, I probably don't care so much about it now. So I never really dealt with anything. And what that resulted in was a catalogue of unhealthy, unfulfilling relationships with emotionally unavailable and, yes, shady. So I experienced some abusive relationships as well. I overworked. I overdid it in friendships. I struggled with my family in terms of setting boundaries. I didn't like myself. And then my health really started to nosedive. I had various different mystery ailments over a several year period. And actually, I can recall even being a bit like that as a child as well, having ears, nose, and throat. I'd undergone a serious operation as a kid. I had chicken pox for 2.5 months. And when I look back at what was going on in my life at the time, I can see how that also sort of correlated with big emotional stresses, big emotional upheavals. And then when I had this immune system disease, sarcoidosis, which was sort of from when I think I was at sort of 25, 26 through to sort of 28 or so, I was constantly burying, never dealing with anything. Everything was, well, I'm not good enough. I'm worthless and good for nothing. Messages that I'd heard as a child internalized. And then when my health really started to nosedive, and they were like, well, if you don't go on steroids for life, you're basically going to be dead by the time you're 40. It was a real sort of, wake up call in the sense of like, where have I been all of my life? I've been so caught up in everything and everyone else. Yet I've got somebody here basically saying to me, you have to go on this medication, otherwise you're basically not going to be, you're not going to be around. And suddenly I thought to myself, oh, but I want to be able to like dance, because obviously he was talking about like mobility and stuff like that. I was like, I want to be able to dance. I want to be able to travel. I do actually, as scary and as out of reach as it seems, I want to be able to maybe be in a loving relationship one day and maybe have kids. And suddenly I was like, what the hell have you been doing with your life? Because I was focused on everything and everyone else. And it was talking out loud about some of what I was experiencing on my then personal blog. Because I had like a blog that I started like in 2004. That's how I started out. It was called Tired of Men and Other Things That Drive a 20 something Around the Twist. And it was me just telling stories about my crappy love life. And living in London and commuting, because I had moved over from Ireland, like I think maybe a couple of years or so before that. And so I was telling these stories. And when I spoke out loud and said, oh, this is what I'm going through, and this is what I've just, started to sort of realize, people were like, oh, you're talking about me, like you're just like me. And I was kind of like, well, that's kind of a bit weird, because I've always thought that I'm weird and unlovable and very different to everyone else. But all these people are saying, I feel just the way that you do. I have the crappy relationships just the way that you do. I don't love myself. I'm always looking for love in the wrong places. I overwork and all this stuff. And that really awakened something in me. And I was asked this question of like, would you blame a child, a 2.5-year-old, for their parents' breakup? I was like, gosh, no. And she goes, you do realize that that is what you've been doing with yourself for like your entire life. And that was like a world shifting on its axis moment for me, where suddenly, once I acknowledged this rather large grain of truth, I was like, oh, if that's not true, what have you just based your entire life around? I look back and I realized I experienced an awakening of sorts that summer, where basically, like when you can't unsee something and it sets off a sort of a chain reaction. And I realized I wanted to fight for myself. I realized I want to be here. I don't want to be in these situations anymore. And that I had to really take a compassionate look at what was going on with me, because we're often afraid to look at this stuff. And it's not even, we're often thinking, oh my gosh, it's going to be so deep and it's probably going to take about 100 years for me to look at that stuff. But actually, when you acknowledge one thing, because of how our brains work, it has a knock-on effect. Because if one thing is true and you've changed your narrative around that, then suddenly other things that you've built your life and your story around suddenly can't be true anymore. Because if 2.5-year-old me was not responsible for my parents breaking up and wasn't responsible for how they treated me or didn't treat me, neglect and sometimes experiencing abuse and stuff. If I'm not responsible for that, then all of a sudden it's like, well, hold on a second. Why are you accepting shady behavior from partners? Doesn't this mean that actually you are worthy of more than you've allowed yourself to be? Doesn't this mean that there are other options for you? Because, if I can have a hand in my own misery, and I look back and, oh my gosh, I mean, the things I used to get up to in romantic relationships, I think to myself, you do wonder if you were smoking crack, sort of back then. It's like, wow, like I seem like an entirely different person, even though I know I'm the same person. And you look at that and you go, well, hold on, if I can have a hand in my own misery, then surely I can have a hand in my own happiness.
Yeah. In terms then of like from the awakening, and I think more people now, because of resources like yourself, maybe people are more aware than they were, and the internet has helped a lot with that too. But then in terms of being like, okay, yeah, I know this, but then letting go of it so that I can go on to grow and flourish and not be sort of constantly like dragged back to 2.5-year-old me or 7-year-old me. Like that's where you have to put in the work. And how did you go about even knowing what work to do?
That's a great question, because it's funny. It would be easy for me to think that the first time I had ever sort of really looked at trying to do any self work, as we like to call it, would have been around this time 17 years ago. But when I look, I still have a lot of the self help books that I had clearly gravitated to from sort of my late teens, all these self help books that I had tried to find answers in and soon abandoned. You go and back then you had More and Just 17 and all those types of magazines that was like,
Yes.
50 ways to please your man, position of the fortnight, put on sexy lingerie, light a candle, make him dinner. That was the answer to all of life's, certainly all of any romantic issue was that type of thing. And a big shift for me happened because there is this sense of, oh God, like I need to make some changes. What am I going to do? And at the time I'd started seeing a kinesiologist, which is it's like muscle testing, and they're working sort of with balancing your body. And so she had identified intolerances. She was the one who pointed out about, where I was carrying a lot of blame and shame and anger. And she mentioned like boundaries in a conversation. And I was like, boundaries? I'd sort of heard it, but never really kind of been like, oh. And it was literally trial and error. I didn't go and off and read some book. She said to me, I can sit here and say to you, right, you need to be careful about eating these particular foods. You need to drink like lots of water, to sort of flush, through, any toxins and stuff like that, to help your body to sort of rebalance and hydrate. And I can say to you about this boundaries, but if you go off and you basically try to live your life how you have been, it doesn't matter what you eat or what you're doing, you're still going to be in that same place. And so I found that I became very observational, because I suddenly was like, oh, where would I have an opportunity to just be clearer about who I am or what does or doesn't work for me? And so I remember being with my mom, I think, one day, and she was going on and on about something. And I suddenly noticed that my whole body had gone really tense. And I was like, Mom, I need you to stop. And she's like, what? I was like, Mama, I need you to stop. And she was like, oh, okay. And it was little things, but big things, like that they seem little in that moment, but actually big things like that, where I found myself drawing a line. Like another example, I used to go, at the time I was working in advertising, and so you have client lunches. And I remember it was only like a couple of weeks after that first session with a kinesiologist, and I wasn't supposed to be eating certain things, and something had arrived. And I don't even know if it was necessarily on the list, but I started to become really itchy. It was like this spinachy thing. It was really like full of dairy. And I've become increasingly sensitive to dairy over the years anyway. So I'm sitting there and I go, oh God, am I going to eat this thing? Like with these, and I could just tell something was wrong. And then I was like, no, you're not going to eat that. So I didn't eat that. And they seem like such small decisions, but these are metaphors for how much we are meeting our needs and how much we value ourselves. So something I say to people is we often make this boundaries thing like super complicated. We often make this meeting our needs thing super complicated. But simply, if you pay attention to, do you hold wheeze? Do you skip meals? Do you delay sleep? Do you work really long hours? These are metaphors for how you feel about your needs. And when I say this to people, suddenly a lot of things start to click into place, because how you do one thing is how you do other things. And so when you, for instance, sit there holding a wee, trying to just keep working, and then you suddenly stand up and say, oh my God, if I don't literally sprint right now to the bathroom, I'm not going to make it. That is because you are delaying meeting a very basic need there. You're deprioritizing yourself. How we do one thing is how we do other things. And so these are metaphors for how much we prioritize ourselves. Essentially, when we're holding a wee, we're going, my boss or the computer or social media or money or whatever it is a greater priority than the very basic of needs. We're skipping and delaying ourselves. You skip a meal, you're skipping yourself. You are, you're delaying sleep, you're shrinking that down, you're skipping over rest. It's all messages to the self about how much you are valuing yourself, prioritizing yourself in that moment.
Kind of taking that thread and running with it, when we're talking about emotional needs and say we're carrying pain and fear or guilt, shame, things from the past, we might not, again, like we talked about, we might not know that we're kind of carrying it around. It's just we feel heavy, we feel sad, we feel irritable, and maybe that's because as kids we couldn't articulate our emotions, or we were taught not to. We have been holding on to these emotional wheeze for a very long time. And then the key is to release, right? What are the sorts of symptoms if we don't address this? Like, I mean, you mentioned some of personally what you went through in terms of it manifesting in physical symptoms, as well as the obviously emotional and mental. But like, what do you think are kind of common signs that people are holding on to some real emotional crap that they need to let go of?
Well, you find that when you're suppressing and repressing yourself, your needs, desires, expectations, feelings, and opinions, that seeps out in passive aggressive behavior, where you are saying one thing and doing another. You've got a smile on your face, but you're acting out with this sort of obstructionist and resistant behavior. It's that whole thing of, oh yeah, like I'm fine, but you're just snapping and you're being distant. And instead of before, where you would be very quick to respond to, for instance, a message from this person, because you're quietly steaming underneath, you're like, wow, I'm going to take half a day or a whole day to respond now. This kind of thing is, these are notifications that we're feeling some kind of way about something. And passive aggression, actually, which is something all humans are guilty of. All humans are guilty of being passive aggressive at times. It is simply that whole thing of, where we say that we're okay when we're not. And then we voice the unokayness in some other way. So actually, we're all guilty of gaslighting on occasion, where, because we don't want to confront something, when a person asks us what's wrong, we say there's nothing. So we let that person believe that it's in their imagination what they have been observing in us, that what they've been experiencing from us. So we can all be guilty of gaslighting in instances. Obviously, there that type of gaslighting, well, it's all gaslighting, but there can obviously be that very persistent, coercive, manipulative gaslighting that also takes place in abusive relationships. I think as well that we humans are designed to feel. We're not designed to suppress and repress. So aside from it playing out as, when we're really backed up emotionally, then we are going to, for instance, start to feel, we end up feeling numb or even dead inside. And then sometimes then, and in fact, often what happens is in order to feel alive at times, to sort of have that escapism, we start doing what can become some pretty destructive and toxic stuff to kind of escape ourselves and feel a temporary high from that. So that's how you can start to get into, a compulsive behavior. And so it could be you're over exercising, you're overeating, you're consuming too much alcohol, you're doing drugs. Like these things are symptomatic of where we have stopped feeling, or we're just not feeling enough. We are lying to ourselves about something, not because we're sitting there going, I want to lie to myself, because how can you know what you're feeling when, as humans, we've been socialized and conditioned to be disconnected from our bodies? If we've been told, if you say, I'm feeling such and such a way, and they turn around and say, you're being rude, you're being disobedient, then of course you're going to not know how you feel, what you're feeling, because you've not been allowed to have the vocabulary for that. Burnout is a classic symptom of unfelt feelings. Outbursts. So, I call it imploding and exploding, because that's like, pressure cookers. And so after a while, it's going to explode. If you left that on the hob, it would just boom. And we're like that as humans as well. So we can implode, which is where we just explode internally. So that becomes like a breakdown, for instance, feeling low, where we don't maybe even know what on earth is up with us. We just know everything just seems to be just going, to pot. But it can be exploding, where actually other people are experiencing from us as well. We're lashing out. It feels like the slightest thing, and we could pop off at any moment.
Yeah, it's misdirected, right? It's like usually over something small, but it's not the root of why.
Yeah, feeling tipped over the edge. That's it's also a good way of knowing whether you are feeling your feelings, that maybe you're stuffing a lot down, is if there's a lot that's going on chatter-wise in the head, where you're like, oh, how are they asking me to do that again? Don't people realize I've got so much going on? Oh, people just blah, 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 and or you're criticizing yourself. These are, as humans, being self-critical and yes, sometimes judgmental of others is part of the human experience. But actually, when you notice that you're doing that a lot, there's something that you're not allowing yourself to feel, because it almost feels impermissible to allow yourself to feel that. And that's how we end up stewing. I call these the people pleaser feelings: anxiety, resentment, guilt, overwhelm, feeling overloaded, helplessness, powerlessness, feeling low. These are all the people pleaser feelings, because they are signs that, and actually not just, people pleaser feelings covers it all, but if you even shift that term to, these are also emotional notifications that you're over your boundaries in some way, that you're not taking care of yourself, that you're not being honest with yourself and potentially with others. This is how you know. And there can literally be a sense of almost feeling backed up in yourself. Like, it's not possible to not feel your feelings and not have distance from people. Like, the two things don't go together, so there's a lack of intimacy. Like, you're there but you're not there, or you let a little bit of yourself be seen but you're not. It's the avoiding conflict, avoiding criticism, terrified of rejection.
Yeah, you are really striking some chords with me here, Natalie. I'm sure a lot of other people as well. In fact, when you said about the dead inside, I've used that as a joke before when I've gone through, shall we say, dry spells, and I've said it flippantly. Oh, I must be dead inside because I'm not kind of interested in any, I'm straight female, so, any guys.
Yeah.
In terms of romantic partners, because you do a lot of work in this area, And it gets used a lot, this phrase, oh, they're emotionally unavailable, almost to the point of flippantly, I feel,
Yes.
but sometimes. Or that it's like, if we're going for an emotional available man, he's brooding, he's mysterious, where actually it's like, no, it's horrible.
Yeah.
And yet, are we holding up a mirror in front of ourselves? Because I think about how I tend to fall into this trap with the emotional unavailable person who's very charming and charismatic, but then, is completely emotionally unavailable. And am I attracting back at myself what I am?
Well, it's more that water seeks its own level. I can't remember where I heard that saying, probably the best part of 2 decades ago, but it's so apt for talking about emotional unavailability, where if you go out, for instance, with somebody, and this is a very overused term, I found particularly over the last decade, we're very quick to diagnose people as being a narcissist or a sociopath. Aside from calling people emotionally unavailable, which to be fair, a lot of humans are, because we've been socialized to be emotionally unavailable, to be fair. But for instance, being involved with a narcissist does not mean, oh, I am a narcissist too. But the reason, for instance, why we would be a match with a narcissist is because we can have this inverted narcissism where it's like, on some level, we're going, I'm not good enough. We're looking for somebody to kind of breeze into our life, sweep us up, make us feel worthy. Narcissists, they kind of have you on a high. So it's like they breeze in, they build you up, then they start breaking you down because obviously they don't want you to get too close to see what they're like. And then we take it personally, which is just perfect, for a narcissist, because obviously they don't have to take responsibility for themselves. I hear from a lot of people who they say to themselves, oh, this person who they literally met like a wet minute ago, oh, like they're just so emotionally available. And I'm going, let me stop you right there. How on earth would you know that somebody that you just met on Tinder, Hinge, wherever, bar, whatever, how would you know based on one conversation or a few conversations that they're emotionally available? Like, that takes time and intimacy. So you need experience with that person. And what you find is, I will have somebody say to me, just don't get it. This person blows hot and cold. They're so ambiguous with me. I just don't get it. Like, all I want to do is be in a relationship. I've done everything for them. And I say to them, there's no such thing as a one-sided ambiguous relationship. Because if you are not an ambiguous person and you're involved with somebody who is behaving in an ambiguous way, then you're not going to be comfortable being ambiguous about that. You'll call it, because it's not the natural state of play for you to be ambiguous. So you'd be like, hey, I thought that we were blah, 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 but you seem like you're kind of not in that place. You feel like you might be, there's a bit of back and forth here. You said this, you did that. You be unambiguous about that. People will go, but I've said how I feel about it. And then you dig in and you go, so you've told this person, this is what you need out of a relationship. Oh God, no. Like, there's no way I would turn around and go. Dating and romantic relationships, we have been socialized and conditioned into a pretty messy idea of what these involve. And in essence, we have picked up some ideas that romantic relationships are basically about pretending to be something you're not, or trying to present yourself as being the most attractive person possible, i.e., what we think the other person wants, so that the person will pick us and they will want to then be in a relationship with us and then marry us and live with us happily ever after. The problem with that is that mentality means that we are going into it already in this people-pleasing mode of trying to be what we think that person wants, or what we think society has told us makes a good prospective partner. And already then we are being ambiguous about who we are. You can't be pretending to be something that you're not. You can't be trying to get this person to pick you and also be yourself at the same time. The two things don't go together. And in a lot of romantic relationships, I come across a lot of people who, when it comes to their friendships, family, work, actually they have some pretty good relationships going on there. When you find out who they are getting involved with romantically, you're like, it could be an entirely different person, but it's like they just go into this totally different mode. Like I'll hear from people who they would be like running this massive company known as being like hyper successful. They got their friends, they got the family. They are going out with these people who are like scamming them, abusing them in some way. Don't know. One day they want to be in a relationship, the other day they don't. Complete contrast.
Breadcrumbs.
Yeah, totally.
Right? Giving the breadcrumbs.
Yeah, drip, drip, drip. And it's this whole pretending to be something that you're not, hiding your needs. A lot of people don't realize that just as a standard in how they are in life, their default is to play down their needs or to act as if they don't have any needs at all. And this is how you can wind up being involved with emotionally unavailable people.
And then does this go back to the baggage that we're holding on to from our upbringing and the mother figure, father figure, caregivers, those in authority that helped to raise us?
Absolutely, because at the end of the day, it's all interconnected. Needs, desires, expectations, feelings, and opinions. Every last thing that humans do is about, in some way, shape, or form, trying to meet needs. And that is only going to stop after we've taken our last breath. So everything we do, we're meeting survival needs, we're sometimes meeting needs for status, for our sense of purpose, for intimacy, for attention, affection. Some of the ways that we go about doing this is healthy and supportive, and other ways that we go about doing these things is not so much. And actually, what I find with people who have a pattern of being involved with emotionally unavailable people is that they are often looking for, time and time again, there's an exercise I do with people that is around trying to find out what needs are driving you. And they will often say, oh, I need like the love, care, trust, and respect. I need intimacy. When they do this exercise, people who have a pattern of being involved with emotionally unavailable people, time and time again, I've seen it now, they are looking for acknowledgement, recognition, validation. Sometimes there is a pursuit of status or power of some sort, and accomplishment is another thing. But they, time and time and time again, it would literally be in this cluster of needs would be either in first or second place. Sometimes duty and control are the other one as well, where it's not that they don't want to be in a loving relationship, but when they look at what actually drives them, a need to be in control, a need to look a certain way, a need to listen to me, acknowledge me, recognize me, that stuff is coming from our past. And that is then seeping its way into not just our romantic relationships. Oh gosh, I've heard from so many people who that plays out where they're turning their boss or their co-worker into their mom or their sibling or whoever it is, or their friendships are really like fraught where it feels like the friend tries to be like a parent or like a romantic. It's our unmet needs from the past, specifically childhood, that we feel we're not met by parents and caregivers, then become these hot touch points that we're then trying to fill via romantic relationships, through money, through work, through sex, through food, through drink, and it can get messy.
And so we're getting to the root of it in terms of like starting the healing process. I can't remember who said it to me, but it stuck with me. I suppose this could apply to any kind of relationship, but I think this was particularly when it comes to romantic ones. How can I expect to have a deep connection with anyone when I don't have a deep connection with myself?
Yeah.
And so is that where we need to start from?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not in this. I'm not somebody who goes around saying, you can't have any good relationships in your life until you love yourself, because there's a lot of that around. And it starts to kind of, people end up internalizing that as a level of, oh, well, one, blame, like it's because I haven't loved myself enough. That's why my whole life is not the way that I want it to be. We don't have to love ourselves perfectly, but we do have to start getting into a relationship, a dialogue with ourselves, where we are allowing us to feel, we're allowing us to be aware of ourselves and starting to get more of a sense of what we need, desire, expect, feel, and think. Because a lot of what we think is us is stuff that we've internalized, like the programming that you mentioned earlier. Like I hear from a lot of people who go, I thought that I wanted all of this stuff that I've pursued. And actually, I realized that because of how I was raised, I was programmed to basically believe that once I'm a woman who turns 30, that I should be wanting to be in a relationship and I should be wanting to be in a certain place in my career. And I should now be looking to be married and now be looking to have kids. That is fine if that is also what you want, but it has to be preference, not programming. And sometimes we don't necessarily understand why we're doing what we're doing. And a place that I encourage people to start from, and it can feel, people will be like, oh, even just about this, it's like, start with asking yourself at the start of the day, for instance, and sometimes even at the end of the day, how am I doing today? Because you're then connecting in with you. And you might be surprised at what you hear, because often we are going so fast and we have got so many things in our life that are designed really to help us to avoid being too close to ourselves that we have no clue how we feel. And if we're checking in with us, and even if at first we're going, I don't really know how I feel, that's an answer. You don't know how you feel. That's a lot of data in and of itself. It's like, I don't know how I feel. No judgments. We don't have to judge ourselves for that. We've traveled a journey to this point. If we don't know how we feel, we have good reason for why we are in that place. But getting into that habit of asking, how am I doing today, is a check-in. Because when you're not doing that and you're out of touch with how you feel, so you can't name how you feel, or you're not aware of why you do the things you do in the way that you do them for as long as you've done them, you'll find that you get caught off guard because, I don't know, something happens today, you don't basically face it, acknowledge it, whatever. Something happens tomorrow, something happens day after day after. Next thing, you're having a meltdown next Tuesday and you're lashing out at somebody, or you're having to go at yourself, or I don't know, you call up your ex or whatever it is. And actually, if you retrace your steps, it comes back to there's been this gradual sort of boiling point. Whereas if you start to keep in touch with yourself, you start to notice patterns. You start to be like, oh, I thought I was feeling that, but actually it's something like this. Like you can have your own descriptor on it. You know, you might just be like, I don't know, I'm kind of feeling a bit kind of out there and not really aware of my body right now. That's a good enough descriptor. Like it doesn't have to be dictionary description. That's a good place to start. And also, you know, a lot of people are nervous of journaling. You know, journaling can literally be writing one sentence if you want to. It can be jotting, today I felt this. Okay, where were you? What were you doing? Who were you around? Even those little notes, a couple of weeks, you have a hell of a lot of data on what is actually going on in your life. Like I say to people, even in the space of a week, you do that most of that week, you will start to notice the same people get on your nerves. And actually that sometimes you have literally the same feeling or the same frustration at the exact same time of day in the exact same place as well. We're funny creatures, we humans.
The Joy of Saying No, which is the latest book. So this is a simple plan to stop people pleasing, reclaim boundaries, and say yes to the life you want. And you've talked a little bit about people pleasing and boundaries, because this is actually a bigger topic than you might necessarily think off the get-go. Was this kind of like, did you have to keep coming back to this stuff and you were like, you know what, there's a book I need to write here?
Yeah, I think it was this realization that pretty much anything that's gone on in my life over the last 17 years, and of course it probably was before that, but specifically this last 17 years, any challenge and the good things that have also come along in life have come about from knowing when to say no, like saying no when I need, want to, and should, but also learning from those times where I didn't say no. And with the benefit of hindsight, I go, oh, geez, I definitely, should have said no in that instance. And a lot of people have a complicated relationship with no. They see it as a dirty word, whereas no and yes are two sides of the same coin. When you say no to something, you're saying yes to something else. When you're saying yes to something, you're saying no to something else. And if you're not saying no when you need, want to, and should, then your yes is inauthentic. You're just telling lies. You're telling people what you think they want to hear. You're saying yes, not because that's actually what you want to say, but because you haven't even bothered to consider yourself, or because you're afraid of what would happen if you didn't say yes. And so in realizing that everything in life is about boundaries. And when I realized that, wow, learning how to say no is the gateway to ourselves, to more fulfilling relationships, to having better careers, just having a better life, a more joyful life all around, to reclaiming ourselves from all of the BS that we've internalized, growing up, but also in adulthood as well. No is the way through, rather than it being this horrible thing that we think is going to cause everybody to abandon us, that is going to cause the whole world to collapse around us, the sky to fall down. Actually, it's the path to us. It's the path to joy. It's the path to better relationships. If you're not saying no, you don't have intimacy in your close relationships, because you don't have an honest relationship. If you're not saying no, you're being dishonest.
I love the line you said, if you don't say yes authentically, you say it resentfully, faithfully, or avoidantly. And that's so true. But why do you think so many of us do agree to do something, even though it's sacrificing our own health and sanity, so not to upset or offend others? Does it come back to the people pleasing?
Yeah, we are socialized and conditioned to be compliant. I say that if you're not a child right now, then you grew up during the age of obedience, where the communicating with, discipline, managing of children was all about making children, excessively compliant, making sure that they were obedient. And as a result, we have lost touch with our no, and we think that yes is the same as complying, which it's not. You're just going along with something. And so a lot of the time we are saying yes, resentfully, fearfully, and avoidantly, because I actually said it automatically. We didn't even pause for breath before we said yes. That's what it's like for a lot of people. They say yes first, and then afterwards go, oh my gosh, like what on earth have I done? Other times it's because, again, yes, we've internalized these messages, but we're so afraid of saying no because we think that no causes problems. So we think that the person is going to reject us, criticize us, get into an argument with us, leave us, because we've learned that no hurts feelings. And we think that yes is the way to an easy life. And it's like, yeah, and then we can passive aggressively try to find our way out of the yes behind the scenes. So it is about our complicated messages around no and boundaries, because if you think about, I've been in many a situation as a child where it's hug auntie who's not an auntie or uncle, hug them, give them a kiss, go sit on their lap. This is a classic example of how we lose our no and become afraid of expressing it, because we are pushed into going against ourselves. We lose our instincts. We're told to do stuff and we know that something doesn't feel right, but we're then like, well, this big ass grown up is telling me to do it, so I have to obey. And we do that like even just a handful of times, and it just becomes the way of life.
Yeah. I was a proper tomboy when I was a kid, and I always remember going on holiday with my gran, and she wanted me to put on a pretty dress for dinner, and I just didn't want to. It made me not feel comfortable in my own skin, so I wasn't allowed dinner. So I had to stay in the hotel. Yeah, so I wasn't allowed to come down for dinner. I had to stay in the hotel room. So I retaliated and ate all the chocolate that we were going to bring home on duty free. But
I love that. Love it.
But I look back at that and think, that was so not right. That was so uncool. And my gran was great, but that was really, she was a bit of a stickler. She was never wrong. She was always right.
Our parents and grandparents' generation and beyond that are they don't apologize generation.
Yeah.
Like the idea of apologizing to a child. Gosh, heaven forbid that you'd ever acknowledge that you did something wrong, or that just that you'd made a mistake. They don't apologize. And they don't apologize whether you were a kid or as an adult now. Don't apologize, don't acknowledge. And, that they can have very, very strong ideas about stuff. Like, it's funny when you mentioned that, I remembered that sometimes when I feel like somebody is trying to like, oh, you should wear that, I literally get a tight sensation in my stomach. And that's because also, like you, when I was a kid, I was told, no, go and put that thing on because that will make this person happy. And I would hate that. Absolutely, you can't wear this, you're not allowed to wear that, why are you wearing this? And so I clearly have these associations with control, around dress, and then you almost want to rebel and lash out and sort of resist
Yeah, it's fascinating when you dive into it. So I think we best promote to how you can dive into it. The book's available certainly on Amazon. That's the usual place now, isn't it, to be fair, where people consume books. For more on you, it's baggagereclaim.co.uk. You've got loads of courses on there. I've signed up for the Break the Cycle 6-week course. I'm in week 1. And I'm glad that you do release one a week, because there's a lot of work to go through in each session for sure. Instagram, you're at Nat Lue. Podcast is the Baggage Reclaim Sessions. Also, cannot recommend enough people checking that out for more on you, because I've not even asked you half of my questions, but that's life.
I could talk to you all day. I thoroughly enjoyed chatting to you. Thank you so much for having me, Gabby.
Well, likewise. Thank you, Natalie. I really appreciate it. Oh, Natalie, such a brilliant lady. Thank you so much again for our conversation. And thank you to you for making it through to the end of another episode of the Happier Life Project with me, Gabby Sanderson. And now for the important housekeeping. If you are suffering with your mental health, there is a crisis button on the My Possible Self app, which will signpost you to the correct information for immediate expert advice. Those of you who are listening on one of the podcast platforms, the My Possible Self app is completely free to download, so no need to worry about it costing you anything. If you found this episode helpful and you've got the time, we'd love it if you would subscribe and leave a review. And to find and follow us on social media, we are at My Possible Self, and I've been at Radio Gabby. So please do take care, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye for now.